Hi, everyone, and welcome to the FEZZIWIG Report. My name is Jeremy Goldstein. I'm your Christmas Jew, and I'm here with my dear friend, who's already laughing at me, Father Philip Duvall. Phil is a priest in the Episcopal Church. And Phil, how are you doing today?
Man, I'm doing pretty good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely.
I love the description of me as the priest, but you as the Christmas Jew.
The Christmas Jew. I like Christmas, and I'm a Jew.
Jeremy, for me, I can name 3 Christmas Jews that are more important to me, and that's Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And after that, it might be you.
I'm like fourth in line. So.
Well, it used to be Neil Diamond, whose Christmas album was very important to me growing up. But you've surpassed him, I think.
And he's actually got 2 of them. So
He does, but his first one was my first concert that wasn't my dad taking me to see classical music. Was actually Neil Diamond in concert, and it was right after his first Christmas album came out, and I saw him do a bunch of Christmas stuff live.
That's a fantastic tale to tell. Phil, what's your Christmas beverage, your holiday beverage today?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. Today I'm drinking Dad, which is the name of the beer by Rheingeist. Rheingeist is a beer from Cincinnati. I'm sticking with local breweries like I did last week.
Excellent.
It's a hoppy holiday ale. On the back it says, "Hi Thirsty, I'm Dad."
That's a quintessential dad joke right there.
That's my dad drink right here.
My holiday beverage is not very holiday, but it is a beverage. This is a vodka mixed with a raspberry mint tonic. I got one of those Soda Streams, and apparently there's raspberry mint tonic. So I was able to make that. And I guess the only thing that makes it Christmas or holiday is that it's red and green.
I was actually going to say it looks red, so sounds.
So that's like my holiday beverage for the day.
That's it.
So one of the reasons why I introduce you as a priest in the Episcopal Church is because it's really great when you're talking about Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol to have someone who's an expert in all things Christmas for a job, on hand. So
I am a professional Christian.
A professional Christian. So Phil, I understand today you have a little text study for us. So I'm going to turn things over to you. I just want to say thanks and take it away.
Thank you. Well, we watched, a dozen or close to a dozen versions of A Christmas Carol, and I've watched about that much just in the last month in preparation for this work. And while I was watching, everybody knows the basic story, which is that these ghosts come to visit Scrooge, and particularly at the impetus of Jacob Marley, who was his old partner who has died, and from the grave comes back to be like, I'm going to show you what you need to see so that your life can be saved. I'm going to show you what you've done, could have done, what you have done, where you are, and what will happen to you. There's this, which is beautiful. And then, of course, he's redeemed by this. This is beautiful. It's also really fascinatingly contradictory to a parable that Jesus tells. Jesus tells a story of a rich man and a poor man. And the rich man lives behind in a gated community, living his rich man life, and the poor man lives at his gates, and he picks up the scraps of the food, and the dogs lick his wounds. He literally describes it this way, miserable. And they both die. And the poor man is spirited away to essentially the bosom of Abraham, it says. So he's gathered to the ancestors of Israel, and he's being held in the arms of Abraham. Meanwhile, the rich man is heads down to this is written in Luke, who writes a lot to the Greek audience. So it says that he's down in Hades. And the rich man sees the poor man up, whose name is Lazarus in the story, different Lazarus than the one you might remember. Sees Lazarus, the poor man, up there in the bosom of Abraham, and says, well, I'm down here and he's up there, and well, could maybe Lazarus throw me like some water or do something for me? And Abraham's like, that's not how this works. This is an inseparable chasm between here and there. And he says, well, could maybe you send some people to my brothers and my family so that they can know that this is what's going to happen, so that maybe they can be warned and not end up like me? And essentially the Abraham in the parable says, no, they've got the Torah and the prophets. If they don't know it from what's already there, that's on them. They've got what they need. And that's the end of the story. So it's literally an opposite of this. And I don't have much more of a conclusion to draw. I just thought it was so beautiful that, like,
Yeah.
Jesus actually kind of addresses this, and Charles Dickens, clearly trying to get people to live into the sort of Christian spirit of Christmas, completely ignores this story and goes a completely different direction.
Well,
Which I think is completely fine.
Yeah, it's funny. The story itself is a contradiction in so many, like within its own parts, it's a contradiction. For example, towards the end, the shocking thing that Scrooge learns is that he's going to die, which I think everybody's pretty aware of that. But it seems to be less terrible if you also know that you'll be a ghost for eternity. So those two things, that is a huge conflict of the purpose of the story in some ways. But then what I love about what you just told us is that it's very specific. It's someone warning. It's someone asking, "Can I warn others about this torment? Can I warn them about be a good person or follow the Torah, follow the writings of our ancestors, and what God tells you, or else you will be tortured." Now, what I love about that is that's not what Jacob Marley warns. Marley does not warn about an eternity of torment for Scrooge in the way that we think. It's not hell.
Not hell.
It's not hell. It's not the devil. It's not you're going to be punished. It's that you will carry these chains which hinder you from, first of all, being dead hinders you from doing anything on earth, but also these chains hinder you from helping people.
Right.
And your chance is now while you're alive.
Now,
your chance to be a good person is now, and it's written in the text. And then there are some versions on film that do it very well. None of the ones that we've talked about yet, I don't think, or that we're going to talk about today. But in some of the later versions that we're going to talk about, like what I call my top 3, they cover it very, very well. Where they show spirits that are tormented because they can't help others.
That's right.
And that's what the torment is. It's not getting poked with like a hot poker by like the devil with the horns and everything,
Which I love you bring that up. It is one of my favorite things in the book, and it's always fascinating when an adaptation, a film adaptation, actually shows that the ghosts in torment because they're now impotent. They're
helpless. Right, exactly. They're helpless to help others, and they realize now what a mistake that was, and it's too late. They can't do it.
So my final word on the matter for now is, when Jacob, it's one of those moments for me. It's a linchpin in the story, and it's one of my favorite lines of all time. And it's a decisive factor for if I like the person playing the character or not. When Jacob Marley says, he says, "You were a good man of business," Scrooge says, "Humankind was my business," is the best line.
Yeah,
it was and how a ghost carries that is a huge deal for me in terms of if I like this portrayal or not.
All right. Well, thank you for giving us that little bit of text to support this. I have one that's going to come up in a later episode as well. But it's always good to talk about these things. We've discussed A Christmas Carol is probably the most widely adapted work in Western literature. It has to be. I mean, more so than Shakespeare or anything else. Like, A Christmas Carol just has been redone on stage, redone. Actually, Dickens himself performed it. Like, he read it out loud. He made money for years after he was the original books on tape, like author reading his own work. So that brings me to, we're going to touch on a couple of versions today because there's a game that you and I want to play that we're so excited about. We want to dedicate a lot of time to it. So we'll cover that in a bit. But what you just discussed is a nice lead into the Albert Finney 1970 musical version, which we are not. I think you and I agree we are not fans of this one.
We are not fans of this, and I went in assuming you were going to be wrong. I want to be super clear.
Okay.
And you didn't like it, and I went in being like, Jeremy's just a grump. Come on, it's Albert Finney.
Would you say you thought I was being a little bit of a
Scrooge even? But this adaptation was a humbug.
Yeah. Just to give it a little bit of an overview, it's from 1970. It stars Albert Finney. Those are two factual things I can say about it. I don't think very highly of it. Part of the problem is that I had never seen it until a couple of years ago, and at least one person said, "Oh, it's the greatest one," and I just knew going in. I was like, no, because I've seen all the greatest ones, so I'm sure that it's not. But Albert Finney's almost unwatchable in it, partly because he plays like he plays just old really badly. Like he does it. He's
not old yet.
So obnoxiously like,
right.
you know, and the songs aren't particularly good, and everything in the version is on the nose. Like one of the Scrooge's first song is called "I Hate People."
People, I hate it. And then doesn't it end with him singing "I love people" or something like that?
It's literally that. It's literally that. There's a ridiculous scene, ties in very, very much with what you and I just talked about. There's this ridiculous scene where Scrooge actually doesn't just see his own death. He goes to hell, and there's like cartoony devils.
It's the worst. Well, so, and the thing I said, so, you know, another reason I was excited and then disappointed by this was that Jacob Marley was played by Alec Guinness, who, as we all know, is genuine class. And the thing that many of us grew up, Andy, you know, Jeremy and you and I grew up on Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've all read, we've read about Star Wars. And one of the things you and I read was that Alec Guinness hated being in Star Wars because he thought it was so campy and so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I watch him in this movie and I'm like, you don't ever get to make that claim.
He's campy and ridiculous.
In a campy and ridiculous movie, and not in a good way.
He prances.
Not in a good way.
He prances in the movie.
Yes.
I guess I recommend watching it to people out there just to see how absurd it is. But please don't make it the only Christmas Carol that you watch. But
watch it if you're like us and you want to watch something just to see. But if you're like,
yeah,
I really want to settle in and watch a Christmas something, don't watch this.
But when you see Alec Guinness, first of all, I didn't even recognize him. I mean, he plays a ghost, and they make him up pretty heavily, so that's nothing. But I didn't recognize him. You know, it's almost 10 years before Star Wars, so you know, I wouldn't have known a young Alec Guinness if I fell over him. But the prancing he does is like, it's like in a 60s movie when someone's making fun of beatniks or hippies.
Right.
Like it's like, I feel like maybe in The Producers there's that, right? Like there's like that element. Isn't it Wavy Gravy or something is the name of the director?
Right. I want to be clear for the audience that when Jeremy complains about Alec Guinness prancing, Jeremy's not making homophobic comments here. Like, this isn't a state. No, I mean, like, people are like, oh, he's just prancing around. Like, that would be like some language you'd hear someone use. Like,
oh, yeah. Thanks for bringing that up.
That's super obvious to you. I'm saying, like,
okay,
that kind of language to be like, to suggest that it's a something like he should be more masculine. That's not what he's talking about.
No, he literally like prances. It's bizarre. It's so weird.
Like a hippie dancing at Woodstock with like who's tripping on acid and no one else is around. Like it's.
To be honest, I was thinking more like, first of all, he is prancing, but I also liked, you know, it's Christmas time and we talk about Prancer as one of the one of the reindeer. So I thought it was a nice little tie in there. Thanks for ruining it, by the way. Yeah, appreciate it.
Your eyes got all big like I was accusing you of something I certainly wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know that there's that much left to say about this version because we're going to move on and talk about a couple of others. Yeah.
I have one quick question about it.
Yes.
In the scene where he's dead and he doesn't know it yet,
mm-hmm.
He goes up to his storefront and they're carting his dead body out behind him and he doesn't see it happening.
Yeah.
What was your response to that? Like that whole thing where they're singing a song of happiness about this guy being dead and he doesn't.
Yes. Oh, and he's completely oblivious. I'll say this about that. That is one amusing thing in many versions, even very good versions, which is that it's that classic like Greek tragedy thing. I mean, Oedipus. You ever actually read Oedipus Rex? I mean, it's obnoxious how many times he's like, well, who could that child have been? And it's literally, you idiot.
Right, it's very clearly you.
That's pretty much, you know, someone who spends a version of A Christmas Carol or Scrooge that spends a lot of time on The Last Ghost has to do that, where he's like, oh, well, I get it. You know, someone died, and you know, I feel bad for that guy.
I get it. I could end up like that person.
I could end up like that guy. It's the future, and I don't see myself. But it's literally, he says, I know those men of business. Where am I? They must have not invited me today.
You're showing me how unpopular I am.
It gets a little ridiculous. So, Not a fan of the 1970 Albert Finney version. But let's talk about two versions that people might not know about, may have never seen, and we're talking about them together because they were made both. They were both put out within a reasonably close time frame. Yeah. The first one is from 1935. It stars Seymour Hicks. And the second one is 1938, and it does not star Reginald Owen. More on that in a second. But the 1935 Seymour Hicks version is the first long-form talkie adaptation of A Christmas Carol. That's a big deal. It's an English production, made in England, and that jumps off the screen. If you could manage to find it on YouTube, which you can, you could tell right away this is a very English film. Very, very dark edges, very shadowy, that sort of thing. Fritz Lang sort of style of cinematography. Stole that from Wikipedia. But in any case, that version came out in 1935. And then shortly after, there's an American Joseph Mankiewicz 1938 version that is put out by MGM. So now you and I have different opinions of each of these.
Yeah.
I like the 35 version. You liked it far more than I did. You want to tell us a little bit about why?
I thought it was super artsy. I really liked the Scrooge. He's one of my favorite Scrooges, it turns out.
Now, he played it on stage probably hundreds of times.
And it felt very like that, but like in an intimate stage way, not in an overly dramatic way. It was inventive. They didn't have the technology to make a ghost like Marley present the way you would think, or maybe they just didn't plan on having the technology. So he acts against an empty stage where Marley isn't, which was very theatrical, but like I thought kind of stylistically well done. Mostly, he was just a far better Scrooge to me than the Scrooge in the 1938 version, and it felt very British to me.
Yeah,
including them singing "God Save the King" for what I could tell was absolutely no reason.
Yeah, it's they sing "God Save the Queen," but the King is on screen. I don't understand how
it's 38, so it would have been a king.
It's 35.
35, so it still would have been the king.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's Queen Victoria, so it would be God Save the Queen. And there was some sort of lord on the stage.
It was a lord, not a king. Good point.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't see. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I liked it. I liked it because I thought for the time and for what I considered to be a pretty early talkie and low budget, so to speak, it managed to dramatize really well. Yeah. I didn't like how old everybody was. I mean, Bob Cratchit looks like he could be Tiny Tim's grandfather, but
I don't know that I felt he was that old. But one interesting thing that I did read up on this one, and I'm gonna share my screen right here. I should have done a side by side. Maybe if I can get can we get in post? I'm sorry, I'm talking to our producer right now.
Right.
Yeah, in post, maybe we can get the graphic, the photo of one of the actors. But the guy who plays Bob Cratchit apparently looks very much like this John Leach drawing from the original version, from the original book.
I think that's right.
And may have even gotten the part because of that. You know, Phil, I do like this version. I watched it again because you liked it so much. I watched it once, in preparation, and then you were talking it up so much that I watched it again. It's truncated. The ghosts are kind of short shrifted. Not only does Marley never show up on screen except on the door knocker, but you're right, he's spoken to off screen. Yeah. But also the only one who physically manifests is the Ghost of Christmas Present, and he's not actually a very solid version compared with what we think. He's beardless, which is just off-putting. Like once you have the archetype of the Ghost of Christmas Present in your head, to see him without a beard, you're like, no, absolutely not. No. But Seymour Hicks is very good.
Yeah.
Again, you could tell he played it like 100 times, so this was his big chance to put it, to immortalize it on film, and he does a good job. The scene that you're talking about, where we see it's like a Lord's Manor or something, and there's this big Christmas celebration. That ties in very much to the spirit of the book being written at a time when they were bringing back all of these Christmas traditions. And so I think that is an attempt to sort of capture that. It's an attempt to capture London and its Christmas feeling, and to show like the shops are all full of like meats and fishes. And
the juxtaposition of Scrooge sitting by himself eating dinner.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so they're singing God Save the Queen. It's this big hall, and there's like tons of singing and tons of joy. There's that. So it's a decent version. It winds up cutting just enough stuff to keep it short that I kind of miss. Now, having said that, there aren't a lot of good copies of it. So the YouTube version I watched was only an hour long. There might be another version that's like an hour 15. If you're going to seek this one out, I say go with the YouTube version. Do not watch a colorized version. It's just weird. But the spirit of the book is 100% captured. It's not, because it was 1935, there was a lot they couldn't do technically, but they open it with the preface from the book that Dickens wrote himself about, it's a ghost story and I hope you enjoy it and all this kind of stuff. And I hope it teaches you something. And if you're not, you know, you don't have to take my word for it.
Right.
But if you're going to seek it out, I recommend looking for it on YouTube. Now, I want to talk about the 1938 version.
Yes.
It's not starring Reginald Owen. So in 1938, MGM puts out A Christmas Carol, and I had never seen it before a few years ago, and this was after seeing all the classic versions. I was so charmed by it from the moment it begins. The story begins with Fred. The whole first 10 minutes are just Fred. He's walking around London town. There's the kids. There's kids on an ice slide in the middle of the street, and Fred drops everything, and he's like, "Oh, I have a slide." And then he's got this great interaction with the kids. Turns out they're Bob Cratchit's kids. So already we've been introduced to Fred and Bob Cratchit before we even see Scrooge. Everything's lively. Everything's fun. Fred gets to Cratchit. He sees him in the office. Scrooge isn't even there. I'm telling you, I feel like we get to 17 or 18 minutes into the picture before Scrooge walks on screen. And from then on, it's just not Scrooge's movie. He's hardly in it because the movie is so insistent on like this American optimism and this American joy about Christmas. Yeah. And
I like those things.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're right. I mean, well, and they're delightful. I mean, Fred is delightful, and the Cratchits are delightful, and the casting that's not Scrooge is really lovely.
Right.
And the kinds of little frills, and a lot of these movies that we've seen, a lot of these adaptations have their own. Like we talked about the Zemeckis version last week, where he did these little mini action sequences, essentially in between ghosts that were really technically beautiful, but we didn't like them. But the things that are added here are actually kind of delightful. They're really sort of wonderful and create a specific mood that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, so
Scrooge seems to be the point of the story.
This is a version where I don't mind how much it deviates from the book.
Right.
There are some versions where they just deviate from a text that is near perfect, and this just takes such liberties with it. Bob Cratchit gets fired because he throws a snowball at Scrooge. Right. That sounds ridiculous when you say it, but it works perfectly within the story. But Cratchit does actually get fired, and then just the joy of Christmas fills him, and he goes on a shopping spree with his final salary. And so you get that American version of what we just talked about in the English version, which is seeing the joy of Christmas and seeing everybody lively and happy. And Scrooge is like a side character who's barely in it. He is acted very goofily.
Yeah.
He's a
lot of stage makeup.
Yeah, a lot of stage. You can tell he's not an old man. He's probably the worst made up Scrooge. I don't think he's a bad actor. It sounds like I think he's a bad actor. He's not. He's playing what he was told to play, which is like be as goofy as possible. He's a caricature of an old miser.
Right.
Almost because like in America, you don't actually have this old man hoarding wealth in a counting house. You have like the cartoony guy you're going to stick it to, like it's all those kinds of things that just make it very fun for me. And then another thing that's just completely inexplicable at the end is, every other version of A Christmas Carol, doesn't matter how long they play the scene at the end, but it ends with Scrooge and Bob. He's going to increase his salary. Maybe he does that at Cratchit's house. Maybe he does that back at the office. But that's how the book ends: is Bob, I'm going to raise your salary. Let's talk about it this afternoon and all this kind of stuff. Instead, Scrooge makes Fred his partner in the business.
Right, which is very different.
Just out of the blue. Like, we've never been told what Fred does for a living, or if he's even qualified, but it's like, Scrooge is the boss.
Partners now.
Yeah, so he makes Fred his partner in the business, which again,
I actually like that better, by the way. I actually like that.
Yeah. Well, I just think it feels like, in America, you make something of yourself, and then like your dad or your uncle like hire you. And so it's going to be like Scrooge and Son or Scrooge and Nephew. Or
so here's one of the things that I genuinely have always loved about you and continue to love about you is you are able to see. I did not see any of the things you're describing when I watched this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And now like when you're saying it, it's like, how could I see it any other way? You are so good at like looking at something from like a symbolic standpoint and thinking contextually about the time and place and how it's presented, so that like the meta narrative that's occurring not only in the story but how the story is being told and to whom becomes part of the larger picture. That's fantastic. I love that.
Let's get that pull quote on the poster for the show.
What's that?
Let's get that pull quote on the poster for the show.
Well, I gotta shorten all my pull quotes. But what I love about you is you're great. But like even the idea when you and I were talking about this and you said the British version and the American version.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, like, it wasn't in my head that way. But that's such a really well done distinction between the two.
Well, I think the English, I would guess, have a strong affinity not only for this story because I was watching an interview, maybe it was a Colbert interview like earlier this week. I think he was talking with Kate Winslet, and he made special mention about how Christmas in England is like insane. And that's an American saying that. Like, I've lived in this country for 41 years. I feel like Christmas is a pretty big deal in America.
Right.
But they did talk about like a Dickensian Christmas and all of those things that you expect out of a version of A Christmas Carol. You expect all those shops lining the street,
Right.
We have shops too, but they're malls. I mean, not in a COVID time. But, we don't necessarily have those small downtowns. But
they still have malls. People are still in them.
Right. Well, anyway.
Just like you and me.
But like in a Dickensian London, just like, stores being open until late on Christmas Eve and everyone's buying the chestnuts and they're buying the goose and all this kind of stuff. The figgy pudding. The pudding is like the star of so many versions of A Christmas Carol. We'll talk about later versions where Mrs. Cratchit like serves it and the lives of these kids like hinge on whether or not the pudding, whether or not Dad likes the pudding. I don't even know what a Christmas is going to be.
They don't know about the pudding.
Right. So in the American version, all of that's there. In the joy for Christmas and all that kind of stuff, but it's told through the lens. It spends so much more time on the characters that you want to like and doesn't have a ton of time for Scrooge. He does get very goofy in like the Ghost of Christmas Present. Like there's a scene where the Ghost of Christmas Present is chastising him and says, why do you want to stay here? You don't like Christmas.
Oh, that was
jumping up and down. He's like, I do like Christmas. I do like Christmas.
I do like it.
And if you're a purist to the story, that's an act too soon. But, he's supposed to be a little bit more, kind of like pensive or thoughtful about it. Or maybe he has fun. He gets wrapped up in the games that they're playing, but not like joyful like he does at the end. So
tell me if we need to table this for another time. If we do, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
But you just brought something up for me again. Like, that's an act too soon. I'd be curious to know when you think the turn happens for Ebenezer.
Save that for another time.
Okay, because I think that's a really interesting question.
That's a great discussion, and so I'm gonna say
different adaptations have it differently.
I would agree with that.
And one of my biggest problems with the Albert Finney version is I'm like the turn never obviously happens. Like it's like when he's in hell essentially.
Yeah.
The very last thing that happens.
Yeah.
Which seems too late to me. But anyways, that's my. I'll stop there.
I think that's a good discussion for us to have next time. Yes. We'll talk next time about that exact thing and sort of compare it with the text. But I think I've said everything I want to say about the 38 version and the 35 version.
I can't wait to hear about this game you've got us playing, Jeremy Goldstein.
All right. Well, then in that case, it's time for a segment that I'm calling Casting Carol. Here's the triumphant music. Here's the impressive title card. Casting Carol. So Phil, last week we talked about, or I should say last episode we talked about the Muppet Christmas Carol. We talked about Mickey's Christmas Carol. Yep. And one of the fun things about doing an adaptation like that is that you're drawing from your own sort of repertory company of characters.
Yeah, right.
So Mickey, it's not just they
Kermit
didn't
and Piggy, like where do they go? What do we do with Gonzo? What do we do with Fozzie?
That's the Muppets, but yeah, exactly. Like
Yes.
when you're doing a Muppet Christmas Carol, you've got your cast of characters.
Right.
So I thought it would be fun for each of us to surprise the other person with a repertory company.
Yes.
For an example for our audience, and this is not one we're doing today, but it would be like, all right, Phil, you're going to cast a Christmas Carol, but only with Simpsons characters. And if you think about it, it's kind of bizarre that they haven't already done that.
It is.
It seems like a no-brainer. There should already have been a movie about it.
Burns would be Scrooge.
Yeah,
Homer would
but that's a story for another time.
Right.
So I pitched out to you, and you pitched out to me, and then we went into our respective corners, and then we casted our versions of A Christmas Carol. All right. So Phil, without further ado, and we didn't really set like a limit on this. It was, go for it, go nuts. I'm going to turn things over to you. First, I want to make sure that you have the ability to share your findings with us.
Well, you have to let me.
Yep. Okay. So Phil is going to be able to share his screen in a moment. And I will tell our audience that the task that I gave Phil was to cast a production of A Christmas Carol with characters from the Star Wars universe. Phil?
Star Wars universe. And so the very first question, of course, is who is Scrooge? And before I reveal who Scrooge is, I think you probably already know, but I just want to say there are so many directions to go in this. There are so many ways that I know I got it wrong. And if I could do it again, I would do 12 different versions of this and have so much fun. I had so much fun with this. But I had to go with the most obvious one, I think. So Jeremy, without further ado, Ebenezer Scrooge would be Darth Vader. It's a gimme. Oh, you're not muted, are you? I want to hear you.
I said, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, there are other kind of possibilities, but so much of his story actually matches, and we'll get to that. So, but from here on out, I wanted to get creative. Some of the relationships match, some don't. And I had to decide, by the way, one of my biggest deciding factors, and you'll know what I chose to do with the very next pick. But one of my biggest deciding factors was, do I want to stay within the original trilogy, or do I want to expand and use prequel and sequel people and whatever else? I decided to go based on my favorite Bob Cratchit to date, Richard Grant. I decided to go with Bob Cratchit being played. I wanted to go the dark and stormy route.
All right.
Kylo Ren as Bob Cratchit.
It's an interesting dynamic, but
it's a very interesting dynamic. It might not work. It's maybe the shakiest of my choices. So you're probably wondering what you've done. Maybe Luke Skywalker would have been a good pick here. I don't know. But I went with Kylo Ren as someone, because he's emo-y. He's frankly, because he's one of the best actors in the whole 9 movies, and he's got a lot of range, and there's a lot that could be done and a lot of possibility. And again, Richard Grant opened me up to the possibilities of Bob Cratchit.
Well, I mean, he is an apprentice, which is Bob Cratchit is a clerk, not really an apprentice. But the idea is that he's apprenticing Scrooge. He just does it for way too long because now he's a middle-aged man. But sure, that's great.
And of course, Mrs. Cratchit is fiery and righteous, just like Ray. And then they finally get to be together.
You're gonna like who I picked for Mrs. Cratchit because it was for the same reason, fiery and righteous. Yeah,
that's fantastic. All right. Okay, so my next person is, we've got Bob Cratchit and Miss Cratchit. Now, I was gonna say the next one is I don't know what you do with all their kids, and that I didn't pick them, but I did pick Tiny Tim. And I went around and around and around, but in the end, Tiny Tim, you and I decided, is a character who's not in and of himself all that interesting, but everyone's in love with him, and he becomes the emotional centerpiece of this thing just by virtue of how adorable he is. I can't think of a more representative choice than Grogu.
Of course.
Mandalorian.
Of course.
Excellent. I wasn't sure if he was going to make it, Jeremy, but you can picture Darth Vader with Grogu on his shoulder walking down the street at the end.
That's great.
And he's carried all the time, just like Tiny Tim. Okay. So then I went to Fred, cousin Fred. You got to get this one right. Nephew Fred, you got to get this one right. He's got to be jovial but serious at the same time. This next character, I actually almost picked him for wrote him down as another character, but his nephew Fred is going to be Poe Dameron. jovial, wonderful, lots of gravity with Oscar Isaac. You know he can pull it off.
Excellent.
Fred, of course, one of the main characters is, though she doesn't have a name as far as I know, is Fred's wife. And so we wanted to show who Poe's in love with and how that relationship is so important to him and all the joy it brings. Fred's wife is played by Finn.
Wonderful.
Because the two of them are
there it is. They're a match set, no doubt.
They're a match set, and I love the idea of doing that. It adds a lovely 21st century flavor in the whole thing, but I think that works. All right. The next choice I made was I think her name is Belle, right?
Yes. In most versions it's Belle or Isabel.
Scrooge's love.
Yep.
From early on. Oh no, sorry. I wanted to do his daughter. I'm sorry, his sister, his younger sister, Fan.
Fan.
And so I chose Leia for Fan, for his younger sister, because who would melt his heart when she walks in? Mm-hmm. Look at that face. Well, what else could it possibly be? Okay. Okay, now we're getting to the ghosts. Ghost of Christmas Past.
Also, in a Star Wars universe, having blue ghosts, like this is kind of a natural. Like I'm surprised no one ever did a Star Wars. I mean, Disney owns Star Wars, so they'll get to it at some point. But I promise you that there will be a Star Wars Christmas Carol.
This is slightly out of order, so I'm concerned that I'm going to miss one. But we'll see what happens. We'll just keep going through. Because Yoda, I almost picked as Fezziwig. Because he's so joyful and funny.
Okay.
We'll decide if my Fezziwig was a good choice or not. But this is what I went with for Yoda. Okay, he's Ghost of Christmas Past.
All right.
Ghost of Christmas Present. Joyful but stern. I was going to have him also. I thought about him as Fezziwig because he was his first mentor.
Oh, sure.
But he wasn't his mentor for very long. And I think he could be the kind of character that says the same lines back to him, to Anakin, that would be like reminding him, right?
Yeah. Ghost of Christmas Present is always more of a teacher in some ways.
Right. And I think that works for Qui-Gon. And of course, Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. My biggest problem with this, actually, I'll just tell you while I'm looking at it, is that he talks too much. I almost picked Darth Maul because he never talks.
Because he never says anything. Well, in the movies he doesn't, but in the cartoons he's quite verbal.
And I think this would work out really well, right?
I'll tell you what I like about this one too is that Star Wars kind of implies that Vader's future is the Emperor. You know, the whole point of the Sith is that the apprentice is supposed to overthrow the master, and they're always talking about Vader will rule the galaxy with Luke. So if he's not careful, he winds up like Palpatine. So that's great.
So so here's the deal. I think my Fezziwig didn't make it in.
Okay.
I don't know why, but Fezziwig should have been Obi-Wan Kenobi, the young Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Okay.
And of course, there's a couple that somehow didn't make it into my share, but of course his young love Belle would have been Padme.
Yeah.
And you can do the old shots of Anakin and Padme together.
Yeah.
With Obi-Wan, young Obi-Wan, as the Fezziwig that has the opportunity to teach him something. Hello there. And show him some things, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a challenge for someone out there to go ahead and make a Christmas Carol by editing together all sorts of Star Wars movies.
and then finally, when Scrooge wakes up, he looks out the window and there's a boy down there and he says to go buy the biggest chicken in all the land. And the little kid gives him a thumbs up. And that
special cameo appearance by BB-8.
I did, and for some reason, again, it didn't make I had a couple slotted. I'm embarrassed.
That's okay. This is
the two
great.
gentlemen that show up and ask for money.
Yeah.
C-3PO and R2-D2.
C-3PO and R. That's perfect. You and I, Phil, it's fine. It's fine, and we'll get to mine in a second. You and I didn't talk about what parts to cast.
That's right.
So we didn't make a list.
Well, I cast the whole thing with some. I didn't cast ignorance and want, and I didn't cast his house.
Well, you can't cast the entire thing, but I think you did a great job. Let's give a round of applause. Excellent
You were
work.
worried. You were worried for a second when I pulled up Kylo Ren as Bob Cratchit. You were like,
No,
I'm wondering if you noticed who was missing from this adaptation.
you mean which Star Wars character or which
Yeah. Which Star Wars character?
Luke Skywalker. You
No,
did
Luke
not
Skywalker.
cast Luke Skywalker. There's
You know
no
where to
place
put
for him in A Christmas Carol.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a. Yeah, that's the nicest thing I can say about
All
it.
right. Well, excellently done. Excellently done.
All right, it's your turn. So, Jeremy, I'm not sure how narrow you went, but my idea for Jeremy was that he would do 90s. At first, I thought just 90s college rock or 90s alternative rock.
Mm-hmm.
But then I opened it up to you and said you could do any 90s music you wanted.
Yeah.
So I don't know how narrow you went within the 90s music genre.
Right.
But my first thought for you was 90s rock.
Right. So I stuck to like 90s alt rock. And so Phil, your task for me was to cast a production of A Christmas Carol starring only 90s alt rockers. It is not a musical version, but if someone were going to write a 90s rock musical, this is the way they would want to go, like for A Christmas Carol. Okay, so the toughest thing is absolutely, in most cases, the toughest thing is casting a Scrooge. And there's really no one who I thought, well, I'm just going to show you who I picked. I picked Billy Corgan as my Scrooge. Are you seeing that?
Oh yeah, that's
There we go. I picked Billy Corgan as my Scrooge for a few different reasons. I think the biggest reason is that he's a curmudgeon. That's Billy Corgan in the 90s. I remember him being just very much like a pretentious like curmudgeon who also made great music. So there's an element of like he's successful in what he does, but he's a jerk about it. So this is who I picked for Scrooge. I stand by it. I didn't want to go with someone who started their career angry and then got happy.
Right.
So it's Billy Corgan could pull this off, I think. But he's our Scrooge. Next up, Fred. Lenny Kravitz.
Oh, I love it. What a great pick.
First of all, this is from the Are You Gonna Go My Way?
Are You Gonna Go My Way?
Yeah, exactly. This is from the Are You Gonna Go My Way photo shoot. And it's like the moment you start thinking about Lenny Kravitz and like that whole kind of, I don't want to say Jesus complex that he had around that time, but like he's definitely like a hippie harbinger of like love and joy. So it makes perfect sense to have him on the joyful side of 90s rock. So there's my Lenny Kravitz playing Fred. Okay, for Cratchit, I selected Kristen Hirsch from Throwing Muses. This is maybe an unusual choice.
Okay.
But I wanted someone who has huge impact and yet is a lower profile person, someone you wouldn't necessarily know, who didn't go out and seek a ton of fame, but whose music like hits like a raw nerve. So Kristen Hirsch is Cratchit in my version of a 90s Christmas Carol. And her wife, Mrs. Cratchit, is played by Kay Hanley from Letters to Cleo. Because when it comes to, first of all, Paige, when she was with us last week, talked about her favorite part of the Muppet Christmas Carol being Miss Piggy. The sock Scrooge right in the face. I couldn't think of someone more badass and more out there and more like upfront, ready with an FU whenever someone needs it than Kay Hanley from Letters to Cleo, especially on Twitter. I strongly recommend following Kay.
Following her on Twitter, I will have to check her out.
There you go. Okay. Marley was tough. Marley was really
was so tough that I skipped him.
Yeah, you skipped Marley.
I did not mean to do that, but we'll come back to that later. Go ahead.
So when Marley came around, I actually took a page from the Muppets, and we don't get one Marley. We get two Jacob Marleys.
Oh, wow.
We get Marley and Marley in the form of Noel and Liam Gallagher.
Wow.
Because they are dicks, both of them. They hate each other. They're just like the spirit of everything that's wrong. And so they might come back and warn Billy Corgan, but more likely they're in hell just fighting with each other, chained to each other.
Man.
But the truth is, you could have gone with one of them as Scrooge and one of them as Marley, and I decided, no, you're both stuck as Marley, wandering me.
And I love the picture you've chosen with them tied together.
Yeah, you couldn't ask for a better photo of these two.
So
yeah,
I should have done Emperor as Marley and Darth Maul as Christmas Future, or Luke Skywalker as Marley and kept Palpatine.
Is this your segment or my segment?
You're blowing my mind. I can't believe I forgot Marley. I'm so embarrassed I forgot Jacob Marley, Jeremy.
Yeah, it's understandable. We didn't bullet out the cast list.
No, go ahead. You're next.
Okay. So Ghost of Christmas Past Amy Mann.
Oh.
Amy Mann, I think, is perfect because she's a storyteller at heart, and her songs are little stories in 3 minutes or 4 minutes, and I just think she'd be a great Ghost of Christmas Past. Ghost of Christmas Present is where it all clicked for me.
Oh wow.
You gave me a challenging topic, and the one that got me, the one that just absolutely clicked with me, was when I figured out who the Ghost of Christmas Present would be. Is Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl of
Yeah.
Foo Fighters. First of all, you know that line about I've had 1,800 brothers?
Yes.
I've always felt that meant sort of like that Ghost of Christmas Present looks exactly the same tomorrow. It's just a different version of the same guy.
Yeah.
Dave Grohl from 1992 to now has been in our lives the entire time.
Yes.
He's definitely like a harbinger of all things joyful about rock music.
Yes.
And I think my sort of
The
yeah,
picture's perfect.
the picture is absolutely perfect. My favorite thing is that Dave Grohl very early on in the pandemic actually wrote a blog post or an article
Yes.
about how we all need to get back to live music someday. No one should ever worry that there's not going to be concerts again, because that's the kind of thing we need. We need each other. That's just such a very Ghost of Christmas Present thing to think.
What a perfect linchpin for the whole thing, man. And
a
a character that's both joyful but also has some gravity in his history and in his life, that so when he speaks seriously, you buy it.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt that every year he looks more like the Ghost of Christmas Present. Okay, so now Ghost of Christmas Future, you could go a lot of different ways with this. Obviously, it's probably one of the easiest ones to do just in terms of how many goth people could fit the part. I went with Trent Reznor.
Sure.
That was my choice. I'm not super into Nine Inch Nails, but like I figured Trent Reznor is kind of like, I only know him as like a dark kind of brooding guy.
Yeah.
If you went with like Robert Smith from The Cure, like he would be a Ghost of Christmas Future with like hearts on his robe.
That's the 80s. That would be the 80s version.
Yeah, Trent Reznor would just be like dark and just have like a lot of metal studs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense. Okay, Belle, I went with one of my first loves, Juliana Hatfield.
Oh, buddy.
This is a photo of her from the Only Everything album. Probably came out around 95, 96, and I was just in love with her, and that was it. So that was it for me from then on. And then I love my Fezziwig choice. Here we go. Beck for Fezziwig.
Oh, look at that.
Not just because he's a bona fide genius and a party animal, but I also want to share the thing that makes him the best Fezziwig. In the book, Fezziwig's only role, aside from closing up the shop early and like making everything nice for the kids, Fezziwig's big starring role is that it's a Christmas dance that they host.
That's right.
So here's some of Beck's dance moves. I don't think that people really think about Beck this way, because people don't really remember his live performances from the 90s.
I saw him live in 2001, 2002, and it was one of the best shows I've ever seen.
I mean, just look at him. He's a fantastic dancer. This was probably around Odelay, I think. Oh, no, this is for 2014. Okay. So, but, Beck is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And, his brooding albums, I think he's made a few more of those, and he's made some like electronic kind of stuff. But what a dancer.
Yeah.
So,
in 90s, and him in the 90s is the ultimate. I mean, just from Odelay to Mutations to like straight through to the one you showed, Midnight Vultures. This was good.
So kudos to Beck. Phil, you did a great job.
You did a great job too.
A toast and l'chaim to you. Very well done in casting Carol. I would say to people watching, feel free, put your own ideas in the comments. First of all, go ahead and smash that subscribe button.
Yes.
Smash that like button and that share button. I don't even know where we're posting this yet, but still. We recommend if you have ideas for your own Christmas Carol cast, please go ahead and put those in the comments. Or you can email us at the FezziWigReport@gmail. I'm kidding, doesn't exist. But just go ahead and put your own ideas for how you would cast a Christmas Carol, either from Star Wars or from 90s rock or some other type of genre or repertory company that you want to choose.
I love it.
Phil, it's been a joy being with you here today.
And since we are about giving,
yes, please take us away.
Last week, you clued us into a really wonderful organization to give to. As many of you know, I live in the Queen City, Cincinnati, and Cincinnati, Ohio, and I wanted to highlight a charitable organization that is very near and dear to my heart and is so important in the life of Cincinnati. and in the life of our church, the church in which I work. And I'm going to do a little. Am I allowed to do a screen share? Do I have the permission?
Absolutely.
To do?
Absolutely, please.
I want to share First Step Home. First Step Home is an organization that is it's housing for women who are recovering from opiate addiction, and it was I think the first one in Cincinnati, maybe the first one in Ohio. That's a residential center for women recovering from opiates, where they are allowed to keep, the women are allowed to keep their children with them. So often when women are in recovery, they have to be separated from their families, and that's not feasible for many of them. They often end up in foster housing, foster care, things like that. First Step Home is a process for getting women through their, getting them into sustainable living. And they do that, and there's the house right there. I've been in that place. And they do that while the women are allowed to live with their children. Some women give birth, like are pregnant when they're there, recovering, in recovery, and have the children and are able to care for them in that space. So it's such a unique place, First Step Home, and you just go to firststephome.org, just spelled out, really simple, firststephome.org. And they're just a wonderful, phenomenal organization. I love them. We've got some people in my church who are on the board there, and they do good work. But I think housing is such an important issue.
Thank you for bringing them to our attention. Please, if you're watching this, please consider making a donation to First Step Home. We'll put the URL down there too, but it's firststephome.org. So thank you, Phil. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Please stay tuned for the next edition of the FEZZIWIG Report. We're getting to the good ones now. I said in the beginning we weren't ranking them, but come on. Like, we're very pointedly going with like our least favorite versions first. Not that they're bad. Some of them are, but some of them aren't. But we're building up to some of the strongest versions of A Christmas Carol, and also the ones that are a little bit more widely available that you can watch on your streaming service depending on what you have. So we're getting to the good ones now. We'll talk about them next week. We're going to have a little debate next week, play another game. It's sort of a game, but we'll talk about what's an adaptation and what's not an adaptation for Christmas Carol, and what we mean by that. And so, Phil, and to our audience, I just want to say, though the FEZZIWIG Report has never put a scrap of gold or silver in your pocket, we hope that it has you done. We hope that I fucked it up.
No! You're so close.
It's this Christmas cocktail, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to keep it. Though the FEZZIWIG Report has never put a scrap of gold or silver in your pocket, we hope that it has done you good and will do you good. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Take care.